Hey everybody, we have a special edition of the podcast. I am here with one of my most favorite people in the world to talk to, Mr. David Reed of Meta Arcade. See how you like that intro?
How about that? Well, that's great. It's the nicest anybody's been to me all day. I promise you that.
Well, there you go. I'm glad I could bring some cheer to your day.
Absolutely.
Of course, you might remember we just talked to David at the last Gen Con.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm hoping we'll get to talk to him again live in person. I'm hoping you'll be at Gen Con again.
Oh, that is the plan.
Excellent.
That is absolutely the plan. Well, it's my favorite show of all of them. And I think, you and your audience are keenly aware of not just the tabletop space, but also the digital space. And, I'd tell you that having been a veteran of the video game business for many years, I really grew weary of big video game shows like an E3 or the big video game part of a PAX where like everybody, it's all dark. Everybody's got these giant monitors showing stuff off. It's super loud because everybody's blaring their soundtrack. You go to Gen Con, on the other hand, or you go to like PAX Unplugged or the parts of PAX where it's a little more tabletop-y, and I just enjoy it a lot more. You can talk to people. You can have decent conversations. You're not queuing up for hours and hours and hours to get a 5-minute demo of the next, Call of Duty or something like that. So yeah, count me in for Gen Con is the long answer to that.
Excellent. Well, I will be scheduling an interview as soon as you are scheduling.
Right on. Great.
Well, let's go ahead and talk about Meta Arcade just a little bit, just in case there's somebody maybe new to the podcast here, and they're saying, what the heck is this Meta Arcade thing you're talking about?
Absolutely. So, and it's always fun talking with you because you were there at the beginning. Meta Arcade is almost 3 years old now. I started the company in February 2016 and really came from the approach of I've been in video games for a long time and decided when I wanted to do my own thing, I realized I feel like I want to be on the creative side of it, not just the, I don't want to denigrate my profession, but I've mostly been a marketing, publishing, sales person across a number of companies and just had the itch to get back to creating things. Well, I'm not technical anymore. I haven't written code in like 20 years. I have never been even a little bit artistic. I've always been terrible at art and realized that if I'm going to get to be creative, it's probably going to have to be on something that I can do, which is storytelling and narrative. I, like probably a lot of your listeners, I continue to play tabletop games, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or the Tunnels and Trolls solo adventures, things like that. I write campaigns. I share them with my friends and things, and thought, well, now that the technology is moving in such a way that you can play these sorts of things on not just your PC and your console, but on your mobile devices, I felt like there was an opportunity to put something together where I could take these ideas for adventures that I've had and turn them into something little tight, compelling thing that'll run on any device that you can play. And as I got down into the process of working with people to build a prototype of what those tools would look like, it started to dawn on me that, because of the very basic approach we wanted to take of letting anybody create, starting with me, letting me create something without having to write code or script or do anything technical, without having to contribute audio or art, being able to import that from other places, very quickly realized, hey, this actually might be something that a lot of people would like to do. And so that led to the very beginnings of Meta Arcade, where we built a prototype of what you got to see at Gen Con 2016 of Naked Doom, one of the first Tunnels and Trolls solo adventures, and taking a lot of inspiration, not just from Tunnels and Trolls game books, but for people who played the Fighting Fantasy books or Lone Wolf, things like that, from that era where, yes, you always wanted to play with a group around a table, but, in that era, it was not always easy to get everybody around a table. We didn't have all this digital communication and things that we have now. And so there would be times where you would be on your own and, playing with one of these solo game books was the way to do it. Well, fast forward, 20 years, and these solo adventures are coming back into fashion. You're seeing a lot of excitement on interactive storytelling on mobile, and not just in kind of the role-playing game space, but I would call some of the biggest ones are in the young adult sort of high school romance sort of area, things like,
Yep.
Episode and Choices and things like that. But at the same time, we are seeing this resurgence of, acclaim for the original Choose Your Own Adventure, Bandersnatch coming out on Netflix and over the holiday, and a lot of people talking about that. This very essential sort of fundamental idea of interactive storytelling is maybe more appealing to people than it's ever been. And the whole point of Meta Arcade from the very beginning has been to let anybody make one of their own interactive stories, turn it into something with art and audio. Maybe you create the art and audio, maybe you use somebody else's. Add the game mechanics under the hood, so you don't have to be a game designer, but it can have the RPG elements of combat and saving throws and things like that, and being able to do it and ship it out on, basically something that can be played on pretty much any computing device on the planet, because this is not super high-end, technically demanding stuff. Kind of that vision.
And I know you you mentioned Tunnels and Trolls. That's where you started out. So can you tell us a little bit about how that's been going for you, and maybe
Absolutely.
Anything on the horizon maybe for Tunnels and Trolls?
Yeah, so we started with again, this is just one of the joys of doing this for me, was very early on, the inspiration for me was the Tunnels and Trolls solo adventures. I just always adored them.
They're so good.
And just some of that stuff, it can be hard to think back to that era in which, there was a period of time where there were two fantasy role-playing games.
Exactly.
Dungeons and Dragons came first, and then there was Tunnels and Trolls, which came second. And Dungeons and Dragons, for those who are Gygaxian Arneson students, will know that the original D&D was sort of descended from tabletop wargaming, right? That's how they got started, and they added heroes and things to this, had added magic. But, that's where you had a lot of the movement rates of characters and the distances of spells were written in inches, because that's how you measured things on your tabletop stuff. Tunnels and Trolls came out, with the designer Ken St. Andre, who had sort of a wildly excited reaction to the notion of fantasy role-playing game, but wanted to make something that felt more like reading a Marvel comic. The action is fast, the characters have interesting dilemmas. You can pick up a comic, and at least not so much today, but in that era, every comic was a standalone story that had a finish and an end in that one issue, and you didn't have these, I need to know 12 years of canon to understand what's going on here. And so that's how TNT got started. And those early solo adventures, like you say, I look at things like, Naked Doom and Death Trap Equalizer Dungeon, both of which Ken wrote, City of Terrors and Overkill and Sewers of Oblivion from Michael Stackpole. Just there is just great sword and sorcery fantasy there. Just sort of a fabulous, sort of new adds to the genre, and some very intriguing things. I'll add Arena of Kazan, the Gladiator Arena adventure that Ken wrote. There's just great stuff there, and I feel like at some level, part of why we picked Tunnels and Trolls to start with is that there's a lot of great content there that, generations of people haven't seen. And so bringing it out digitally is bringing a lot of new people to Tunnels and Trolls. And, Rick Loomis and the guys there would tell you that they are enjoying a spike in sales, because now lots and lots of people who never knew about the tabletop game have been exposed to it via the digital apps on the Apple App Store and Google Play, and are now finding their way towards playing the game on tabletop.
So do you have anything upcoming for that, or is it just kind of business as usual as it is with the Tunnels and Trolls side of things for Meta Arcade?
So the big thing going on with Tunnels and Trolls is that it is the first of the three universes that we are bringing in to the new Meta Arcade platform. And that, I know that's our big news of bringing the platform out in a closed beta fashion next month in February. And so what we're doing is we're starting by remastering a number of the adventures that we've had that are in the current Tunnels and Trolls game, and bringing them into this new format. And certainly we'll want to talk about that. But that's the biggest thing that's going on with Tunnels and Trolls. We did, over the past year, start a community creation program, and we're able to publish 3 adventures, all 3 written by 2 guys who have been published in the RPG space before. Stephen Jones, who continues to work. He published Dark Temple, one of the classic Tunnels and Trolls solo adventures. He continues to work with the Fellowship of the Troll in a number of endeavors. He's written for GURPS and Villains and Vigilantes and whatnot. And then our other community creator who got started in this, William W. Connors, one of the co-creators of the Ravenloft setting for TSR. And so we're talking about veteran guys here who made some great stuff, and we've been able to publish those things out. People who are playing in the Tunnels and Trolls app will see them as the two-part adventure Necropolis of Var, and William's adventure The Black Heart is sort of an evening gone awry in a tavern, as often happens. And so both of those guys, are got a good chance to work on the creation tools. And, frankly, we're important contributors, among others, to getting us the feedback that has brought us to where we are now with that. So a lot of, we might be sneaking a new adventure into Tunnels and into Cthulhu Chronicles soon, which teases a bit of what's coming up in the closed beta on the core platform. But the big exciting news there is bringing it to the full platform, where now we won't just be bringing out the adventures that we've made in the past, but everyone will be able to make their own Tunnels and Trolls adventure. Play it on your own device if you're comfortable sharing it, but submit it for publication for the world to see if you are.
That's awesome, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of great content, because I know, just for example, over on the Dungeons and Dragons side, they have the DMs Guild, and there is so many talented people putting stuff up on the DMs Guild every day. So I kind of attribute this to that in a way.
Yes, it's funny you say that. I mean, we've partnered with the Drive-Thru RPG guys on a few different fronts, and like as an example, there is. Look, this is sort of one of these leading indicators, I'd call it, that got me excited about Meta Arcade as a business proposition. Was, number one, Drive-Thru starts this process with, like you say, DM's Guild with Wizards of the Coast for, allowing you to make a, call it a semi-official, if not fully official, Dungeons and Dragons product from your own computer. You make it into a PDF, you publish it up, and, of course, every time there is revenue generated, you get a piece of it, as do Wizards for their license and Drive-Thru for being the platform. Well, what that started to spawn was an interesting business where people would then put their art up there for sale and say, hey, use my art in your Drive-Thru RPG DM's Guild adventure, and pay X dollars, and now you have a perpetual right to use my art in your adventures. You just can't resell it at clip art. Well, we worked with the Drive-Thru folks to reach out to all those artists, a little over a year ago, and started bringing their art in to Tunnels and Trolls. And similarly, we've been doing, the business they have with Chaosium on Miskatonic Repository is different, but similar to the Dungeon Masters Guild business.
Right, yeah.
And that's another place where we've been reaching out to people. And so, yes, that idea of people contributing art and creating their own adventures, there's a core to that in what Meta Arcade has always been about, just doing it digitally, on being playable on these devices, and not just a PDF, which is more of a tabletop thing, right? That you are playing with your friends. We think there's a solo way to make that happen as well on these devices.
And since you kind of brought up Chaosium, we did talk to you with Gen Con about your Cthulhu Chronicles, which is amazing, so much fun. I love the wheel.
Oh, well, thank you. That's good.
The Wheel of Cthulhu was awesome.
Yes.
So you want to talk a little bit about what you did with the Cthulhu Chronicles and how it kind of differs from Tunnels and Trolls?
Yeah, it's great because, number one, we got the discussion going with Chaosium after launching Tunnels and Trolls at Gen Con 2017. And that's where we met those guys and started talking about what we could do. It turned out, number one, Chaosium has a number of solo adventures that they've published over the years. Not in the same way that Tunnels and Trolls has, but there's Alone Against the Flames, Alone Against the Dark, Alone Against the Wendigo. They had a history of making these things. And so Alone Against the Flames became the first adventure that we started remastering with them, and it is the first adventure in our campaign path of Cthulhu Chronicles. And in working with them, we started doing a number of interesting things. The first is that, much like with Tunnels and Trolls, there's a body of art that existed, and we licensed that as part of our partnership with Flying Buffalo, and so we've done the same thing with Chaosium to bring that original Chaosium art into Cthulhu Chronicles. But as you think about, for people who are, pen and paper book people, they know that, not every page has a piece of art on it, and, you need more. You don't always have all the art you need to render an adventure. Well, part of what we were able to do with Cthulhu Chronicles was Lovecraft's writing and the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game are largely set in 1920s, 1930s America, in Arkham in the greater Boston area and things like that. And what one of our folks here uncovered, Sam Reardon, our head of content, uncovered a huge repository of public domain photos that are available royalty-free from the Library of Congress. And we have all these sepia tone photos of people, locations, objects, vehicles that we've been able to bring into Cthulhu Chronicles. And so that was a big part of the work as well, a bit of an inspired discovery that really was interesting. And so Cthulhu Chronicles, if you think about Tunnels and Trolls Adventures, it is a pretty authentic rendering of the tabletop game. Not every single rule and things like that, but the core mechanics of combat, of saving rolls, of skill checks, of leveling up. We pretty much took TNT by the book and made some adjustments for playing on digital, but went with it like that. With Cthulhu, we definitely tried to make it a little less tabletop RPG-esque and a little more interactive novelish, if that makes sense. And so that's where you see things like the idea of, number one, we didn't have you create a character in Cthulhu Chronicles. You picked a pre-gen because we felt like what was happening in the interactive fiction space would be more appealing to a wider audience if they didn't have to create a character. Similarly, like you talk about the Wheel of Cthulhu, we felt like, yes, the dice roll under the hood, if you will, right? Like the Wheel of Cthulhu is translating the base Call of Cthulhu rules into this when you are doing a skill check or you are in combat. But we just tried to make it look a little more a mechanic that was more broadly understandable to the mobile gaming audience as opposed to the dice rolling across the screen, which a Call of Cthulhu player is used to with dice rolling across the table. So those were some of the differences there. And, of course, the narrative being very different, right? Tunnels and Trolls is a classic sword and sorcery dungeon crawlers sort of thing where you start as the level 1 peasant who might be eaten by a rat in right? But by
many times.
Exactly. But by level 20, level 50, level 100, whatever, you are an untouchable demigod who lays waste to everything with a glance. Call of Cthulhu is not like that, right? It's not a power fantasy. It is, you are a normal human way over your head against these eldritch horrors from beyond. And, the best you can hope for many ways is to survive with your sanity.
Exactly.
So, the narrative reflects that much more richly on that front, whereas Tunnels and Trolls is reflective of the sword and sorcery, Conan wandering the earth kind of vibe. Both different in those respects.
So I know you kind of said you got some stuff related to the platform, which we're going to talk about here in a second. Coming up for Tunnels and Trolls, how about for Cthulhu Chronicles? You kind of going to do the same thing?
Absolutely, and in fact, that's universe number 2. Maybe no big surprise, right? That Tunnels and Trolls and Cthulhu Chronicles both are going to be there on day 1 in the platform, and people will have a chance to play these adventures for free. And will have the opportunity to create their own. And part of what's going to be interesting with both of those brands, both of those games, is we've taken a different pass on the art. And part of why on this is that we brought a lot of art from very disparate sources, right? And again, we're a small studio, and we're not, don't have a huge graphics team making a whole bunch of art for us, right? And so, to get these games out the door with the appropriate amount of art, it did lead us to, for example, with Cthulhu, the public domain art, with Tunnels and Trolls, a lot of the drive-through RPG art, which, by themselves, this is all high-quality stuff, but when you start mashing them together in an adventure, it did lead to some inconsistencies in the art direction. And so part of what we've done with Tunnels and Trolls and with Cthulhu Chronicles is we are remastering all of this art in a different way. So with Cthulhu Chronicles, for example, what you'll see is we've taken the original art from Chaosium, the original photos from the public domain, things like that, and have gotten a few more resources now. So we've added to an art team that has basically been repainting over them in black and white, and there's this dash of red in Cthulhu Chronicles art where things that are a little more eldritch or sinister, or frankly, if there's a dead body in a pool of blood, you'll see some red for that as well.
That's awesome.
It's a really, we're really excited about how this aesthetic has come together, kind of reflecting that sense of horror and dread that you have in Lovecraft's narrative and in the Call of Cthulhu Adventures, bringing that to bear more in the art as well. Similarly with Tunnels and Trolls, we're doing something where in the original app, we kept a lot of the black and white art, in its native form, if you will, right? It just sort of looking at the black and white art as you would have seen it on a white page if you were to purchase a rule book or a solo adventure. What we're doing now is we're giving the book treatment of sort of a parchment feel to Tunnels and Trolls. And so you'll see that black and white art, but it will be shaded appropriately as if it were, drawn on parchment. And
oh wow,
we'll have some examples of this that we can send you, and we're sharing more of this material live as we progress. The blog that we published last week has a sneak peek of some of the early Tunnels and Trolls and Cthulhu Chronicles art, and so that's one of the big things that people will notice right away is that the art is. We think it's just improved.
Exactly. All right, so we've kind of teased it enough. Let's get into the meat and potatoes, as it were. The Meta Arcade platform. You are getting ready to go into a beta just a few days here into February. So spill the beans. Tell me all about it.
Absolutely. So, the Meta Arcade vision was always around the creation platform and letting people create these things. At first, the thinking was let them create Tunnels and Trolls adventures, let them create Cthulhu Chronicles adventures. And over time, we realized that this notion of interactive storytelling is pretty darn appealing to a lot of people. And the best interactive storytellers in the world are the people who've been playing tabletop and digital RPGs, right? We are used to the idea of branching narratives, right? We're especially if we're writing these adventures, we're used to like, oh, well, if the players go this way, here's what happens. If they go a different way, here's what happens. We're used to thinking about giving the player agency in the adventure, that they're not just a victim of arbitrary choices and chances, that yes, there is an element of chance in a mechanic like combat or a skill check, but my strategy, my experience, my choices will have an impact on that chance. This is something that, those of us who've been playing these games have been, buying and selling and writing and creating and sharing and playing for decades now, and it gives the RPG player an advantage in how to think about crafting interactive stories. So the platform now is coming out in its first closed beta in February, and people will be able to download the software that we use to play and to create all of these adventures. And we are going to give people the ability to very easily create Tunnels and Trolls adventures, Cthulhu Chronicles adventures, and a new intellectual property that we've made that we call Old Roads, where you'll be able to play three adventures in each of these three universes, is how I'll say it on day one. And we're going to keep adding to that. And you'll also be able to create your adventure in those universes. And if you want to create your own universe, or you want to create a fan fiction interactive adventure of a popular universe, you'll be able to do all of that starting next month when we put the plan. So there's probably a lot there to talk through, and
yeah.
Let me pause for a bit and let you do that.
All right. So you did say you can download the tool set. So is it only going to work on like a PC?
That's how it is right now.
Okay.
Where on day one it will be PC. There's no reason why it can't be Mac. To be precise about Windows versus Mac, that's just time. And there's really no reason why it can't ultimately be done on a tablet. I hesitate to think it could be done on a phone just because you're
Yeah,
browsing a lot of assets and typing your novella on a phone. Maybe my children can do that. I
exactly.
don't know how many others can. So our thinking is the creation tools are best used on a computer, and we started with a PC build. So that's where it begins. Um, Ultimately, right, we do expect to extend that out further, and we ultimately will as well. Well, I guess one of the big things we learned, going through Tunnels and Trolls and Call of Cthulhu, a lot, while a lot of interactive narrative today is consumed on mobile devices, and even just straight up narrative, right, on Kindles and things like that, that's just how a lot of people consume these things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the place where we're going to find the right person for this, that we're going to get in front of the tabletop RPG player, the tabletop gamer, the storyteller of interactive stuff. And so we quickly decided that the Meta Arcade platform, we were going to, from day one, anchor it on the PC first, and have mobile play as well, but do that with a unified account, so that you have one account that gives you access to the creation tools, that lets you see the stuff you've made, gives you access to the adventures themselves, that lets you have that one persistent character, and ultimately you can do that across all of your devices. Day one, again, it's going to be PC, but mobile play is not far behind.
All right, and you did say that people could create anything they want. So let's say somebody would like to create maybe a superhero adventure.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to handle the copyrights on that?
Aha. So here's how we're thinking about it right now. And to be clear, in closed beta, nothing is monetized at this point, right? As most closed betas are, right?
Right.
So monetization isn't an issue on day one, but once you start driving revenue on these things, that's where the copyright stuff gets really, really important. And so, to be clear, right, if you were to go to fanfiction.net or Wattpad or a place like that where you see a lot of people writing fan fiction, you'll see that it's not monetized, right? That for the most part, if you're writing a Harry Potter or Star Wars story or something like that, nobody is making money on that. It's fan service, it's fair
Right.
use, it's those sorts of things. So we expect to do the same thing on the interactive side, and we call this basically our sandbox, where you download the tools, you make a thing, you can choose your own art and upload that, you can write your own narrative, and so let's say you go through that process and you do want to make a Star Wars adventure, a Harry Potter adventure, what have you. The first thing that happens when an adventure is submitted into the sandbox is we take a quick look and make sure it's not inappropriate, right? We don't want hate speech adventures. We don't want
Right. Exactly.
pornography, those kinds of things. Let's assume that you're a good actor and you've done appropriate things, but you've done it with an intellectual property that you don't own, or that we don't have a license for. So in that case, it's going to remain in the sandbox as something that people can play and that you can talk about and get feedback on, but you can never monetize it, right?
Okay.
That is the biggest thing there. So again, if you go look for Harry Potter stories on Wattpad, you'll find over 100,000. Star Wars, League of Legends, whatever it is, there's a ton of that out there. But if it's not monetized, that's going to be our approach of letting people make fan fiction. Now, let's assume you are making your own, and we'll tell you, right, if you've put something up there and it's like, okay, you can't monetize this because you've got somebody else's intellectual property in here or things like that, and we know the community will help us with that as well. But if you are making something which is your own intellectual property, or you are making something that is in one that we have licenses for, then that will be something that you can monetize and make some money on.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. So, if somebody would come up with the Tunnels and Trolls adventure or a Cthulhu Chronicle adventure, that would be monetized and
Yes.
not in the sandbox. Okay, all right, that makes sense.
Once we get to that point in the development process, which again, closed beta is a little bit, we're going to start from the basics of did we get the interactive storytelling engine into a good place where people can easily create these things. And then, assuming, okay, we've seen that settle in, that's working well. Now let's add more RPG mechanics. Okay, that stuff's working. Okay, now let's get to the open beta where we begin the monetization and things like that. Again, these aren't, look, software always comes with its risks and you never know, right? But this by and large is code built on proven technologies, things we've tested out through our first two releases for TNT and Cthulhu. And I don't expect, we're not talking months and years until monetization happens. It shouldn't be too far.
Okay. And then, so let's say I download this on my PC.
Mm-hmm.
How easy is this going to be for me to, like, if, myself personally, I'm like a tech person, so tech doesn't scare me, but let's say a non-tech person has this great idea for this Cthulhu Chronicles adventure that's going to be amazing. How easy is it going to be for the average person to sit down in front of this and create?
Yeah, so I always go back to the, me as patient zero, right? Of,
okay.
Okay, look, I have stories. I can't draw. I can't compose audio. I can't write tech. What is this process by which I can do things? And yes, the creator is designed for that person, that experience in mind. There is no need to write any code or script. There's no need to create art. We'll have libraries of art and audio that you can use. And like we say, if you want to upload your own art, you can do that. Know that we'll have to take a look at it and make sure you didn't upload something objectionable. And assuming you didn't, we'll put it into the sandbox. At some point, we'll do that for audio as well, where people who are composers want to create their tracks and put them up there for other people to use.
Okay.
To be clear, audio is a little harder to screen. I don't know how to listen to everything.
Right.
So that will come later. But those ideas of yes, I want to actually pull in this art from photos on my phone. I want to make an adventure about my family, things like that. I want to, use images from things that you have found on the internet for a particular intellectual property. Again, as long as it's fair use and you're not making money on it, then, we want to give credit to the people who created that art. But beyond that, we think it's a fan fiction story and abides by that. But so you now coming back to your idea, right? I've got a great Cthulhu story in mind, and I want to put that up on the platform. You will be able to do it without having to write any code, without having to draw any art, without compose any audio. The first thing there again are the libraries. You will go into, and for people who are familiar with Twine, for example, it's an open source engine for interactive stories. There's similarities there. Or I like to joke about WordPress, where if my mom can make a blog on WordPress,
exactly, yeah,
then kind of anybody can. And so the creator is governed by drag and drop menus, by the idea of I'm typing in narrative and I'm getting the I'm able to see how that narrative is going to look in the frame that when it renders on the PC and ultimately on the phone. I'm able to listen to the audio and see the art and compile it all together, and I'm able to click play and test out how my adventure is going. Similarly, our early creator tools were pretty rough, right? All early software is in its prototype stage and such. So a lot of what we've been able to do with this new set of creation tools is, for example, help the creator out with number one. If you've written we call these things frames, like a moment in the interactive story. Narrative, choices, art and audio, that's a frame. So
okay.
You've written a frame and you've got a couple of paths coming out of it. I mean, a very basic, you come to a T intersection, do you turn left or do you turn right? Well, those are two choices. And each of those choices will lead to another frame, another moment in the narrative where there may be other things happening. In the old Meta Arcade creator that we had, we did not have systems in there to indicate to you that you have a a dangling frame, if you will. You've put a branch in here that has no content behind it. We now have visual cues for that of like, oh, there's a little red dot here on the map that's telling me I need to go back and put a frame there. I got the go left path, but I didn't get the go right path. Similarly, when you want to put a combat or a skill check in, you don't need to do a whole bunch of game design. It's a skill check. Is it easy, medium, hard? Here you go. Is it a combat? Is this an easy, medium, hard monster? Is it a monster that already exists in the bestiary, if you will, of that universe? Great. If not, it's easy to create one. You assign it a couple of stats of what's its staying power in combat, how much damage it may do, things like that. You're able to add that stuff in without having, again, if you can write, at the highest level, if you can write an adventure for a tabletop game, if you're able to come up with those stats and things like that, you're going to be able to do this without having to write any code. And even if you're not an RPG person or a dungeon master or a game master or things like that, or a judge, thinking back to Judges Guild, things like that, even if you're not able to do that, you will be able to easily create your own interactive branching storyline with art and audio, and then start adding game mechanics from there, because that all as well is simple drag and drop stuff. It's time for a skill check. Is it easy, medium, hard? How many dice are involved? Go. You don't have to do any game design for that. That is all handled under the.
So it sounds like just basically if you're a good writer or you have an idea, you're going to be able to sit down with this and make it.
You got it. That is really it. And I think about, we talk about Gen Con and we love, tens of thousands of people who go to Gen Con. And almost all of them have written adventures for one game system or another. And almost all those adventures have probably been played by 5 or 10 people at the table and never played again. Well, think of all the adventures that all of these people have written, and why not give them a chance to get it out digitally and see if there's, is this stuff that other people like to play? Should I keep writing this campaign? Is there, I don't know how many people will, become zillionaires writing these adventures. And
Right.
But, hey, why not have an outlet for my creative passion in this big growing audience? And maybe I will make some money. That to me is a super exciting proposition.
So you want to talk a little bit about how your monetization is going to work?
Absolutely. So the thinking on this, and for people who have played Tunnels and Trolls Adventures or Cthulhu Chronicles, you'll know that, we basically have, in Tunnels and Trolls Adventures, we had an advertising model as well, where you could play anything you wanted to for free as long as you were willing to watch an ad before you started an adventure. But the primary way people consumed the content there was they found that they actually really liked an adventure, and then they bought it. They bought a bunch of them. And we did that through virtual currency, where you would buy a pack of gems, is what we called it in Tunnels and Trolls, and you'd spend a few bucks on each adventure. You'd own it forever and could take any characters through it that you wanted to. We did a similar thing with Tunnels and Trolls, with Cthulhu Chronicles, but we called them tickets, and we did not have the ad model in. We ultimately felt like that was just, even though we weren't interrupting your adventure with an ad, we just felt like it took you out of the flow and the immersion, and we didn't like that. So we didn't put ads in Cthulhu Chronicles. We gave you a free trial every day, and you can play an adventure for free, but if you want to do more than one per day, you ultimately need to buy the tickets and spend a little more of that. Well, what we found now going forward is that this idea of the virtual currency, it doesn't help us. A lot of gamers, and hey, I mean, you guys are DDO players, so you know what virtual currency is like. But
Yep.
a lot of people don't. A lot of people, aren't really comfortable with virtual currency. A lot of people don't like the stigma of loot boxes and the nightmare stories of kids running up thousands of dollars on a parent's credit card.
Yep.
Right? And that's just not we're not in that business model, right? We're not in a try to sell loot boxes things. We're selling content, and so we are adapting the business model to be a premium content model, just like you see on DriveThruRPG, or just like you see on a Kindle, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, there'll be some sample content that you can get for free, and in the end, if you want to play all the adventures that a particular author has written. You're going to purchase them. You're going to purchase them for a low price. It's going to be, again, imagine it's a it's a cup of coffee or less, and I'm not talking the venti vanilla soy latte that's $8, right? But the idea is to be just a buck, $2 a piece kind of thing on these adventures, and being in that model that is very similar to what you see. Again, I love talking with people who know Drive-Thru Dungeon Masters Guild, because it's just so clear how the business is parallel there. You see things where imagine that. Here's how it's going to work at a basic level. You're the person who's made that Cthulhu adventure. You've put it up and submitted it to be published. So the first thing we do is take a look and make sure nothing terrible is in there. Okay, nothing terrible is in there. Now it's in the sandbox. If you want to monetize that, the next thing we do is we take a quick look and make sure it's okay to monetize, that you're not violating somebody else's intellectual property. And if you are, we're going to tell you, sorry, you can't do it, and you need to make some changes. But let's assume you've cleared those hurdles. Now it's live in the sandbox and people are playing it. And you can ultimately put a tip jar on it, for example, like you do with Drive-Thru, where pay what you want. You can do that kind of a model.
Okay, yeah.
And part of what we think as well is, the whole idea of platform and the community collaborating and supporting each other. As you get feedback on your adventure, we start to see that you're getting a lot of upvotes. And we may say, okay, look, we actually want to pull you into what we call Meta Arcade Presents. This is where the best community content is. And this is where now let's just put a dollar price on, right? Or again, in different regions, it'll be a different price on, right? But the idea that, okay, Meta Arcade is going to go through the process of trying to select the best of the best as voted on by the community. And that'll be a place where, number one, you'll be in a different part of the store in the PC. You will have an advantage by writing better content that will ultimately get you better monetization. And if you think about it, right, the PC is a great place because you can have, if there's 100,000 adventures on Meta Arcade, they'll all fit in the PC. You can't really do that on the App Store, right? You can't have 100,000 pieces of DLC in the Apple App Store or on Google Play. Even Steam is going to buckle after a while. So
yeah.
Part of how we're thinking about it is this becomes the place where we then put DLC packs together, if you will, right? So, hey,
cool.
Congratulations, your Cthulhu story has been so successful that we're going to include you in the October DLC for the App Store and Google Play, and you're going to get a big piece of revenue every time somebody buys that DLC pack because you contributed content to it. That's the core monetization model: premium content, community voting up the best of the best, and we take those, package them, not just for the PC, but ultimately for the app stores as well.
That is an amazing idea. I like the DLC of the month, or for lack of a better term, idea. That is really
cool.
Great. And I think that will spur some really great creativity in the community as well.
Well, that's the hope, right? And the hope for people to be able to make whatever they want, again, avoiding the objectionable side of that, beyond that, right? But write the Cthulhu story, the TNT story. We're going to be bringing more games on to the platform as well, and letting people write their creative visions and things, and just see, haven't we all wanted to see if that adventure we wrote was, could we have gotten it printed by somebody? Well, now here's your chance, right? Find out and see if there is a fan base that you can build. And importantly, obviously, if you are making a Tunnels and Trolls adventure or a Call of Cthulhu adventure and Cthulhu Chronicles, you don't own the IP of Tunnels and Trolls or Cthulhu, right? That belongs to the publishers of those games. But if you've written a really intriguing story and campaign world, that's yours, right? And we're here to help you get your adventures out there. But if you've written something that builds a fan base and you're making screenplays and action figures and whatnot, that's yours. That's your intellectual property. You own it and can do whatever you want with it. There are plenty of places where people got to start in fan fiction, right? And in things like this, where suddenly they found that they were onto something and were able to build a real business for themselves out of it. This is, some people get a certain amount of acclaim for being fan fiction writers, then start making their own intellectual property. Some fan fiction properties turn into intellectual. Some people may know this story, but for people who don't, when Twilight got started, there was one particular fanfic writer who was writing stuff that was a little more risque than the Twilight community liked, and they told her, "Hey, look, we don't actually want that stuff here. You're going to need to take it somewhere else." Well, what she found was that she had an intellectual property that actually, once she changed all the proper nouns and it's not Twilight anymore, it became 50 Shades of Grey. And, I'm not judging the literary merits of these things, right?
Right.
But I am excited by that opportunity, right? Of like, okay, maybe I start writing my own Tunnels and Trolls adventures and realize, hey, I've got my own intellectual property here that I want to take into other media, that I want to make comic books for, things like that. Hey, that we hope Meta Arcade can be an enabler.
So you did mention that you're going to have a third IP. Can you tell us a little bit about that? It sounds like, if I understood you correctly, you guys created this?
Yes, and it's so this is an IP we call and Old Roads is basically, we've all been fascinated by a lot of the mythologies around the world and the folklore, and how, when you are reading some of these tales, you're not just getting an adventure of a normal person in sort of supernatural circumstances. There's always an allegory, a parable of what it is to be human. And so this is what Old Roads is all about, is allowing the player to walk through various folklores and mythologies around the world. Our first one that we're doing is based on Slavic mythology, Tales of Baba Yaga. And we picked that
awesome.
one. Yeah, we've picked it because it's a mythology that, a lot of us in the West aren't super familiar with, right? There's a lot of, all of us who have an old Dungeon Master's Guide know Baba Yaga, but beyond that, there's a lot that we don't know, right? Of what are the creatures, what are the supernatural tales, what are the circumstances that people have found themselves in those things. And so we're starting with the Slavic mythology and bringing that out. And so your first campaign will be a walk through the Old Roads of sort of roughly 8th to 12th century Russia and adjoining territories, where you encounter the things that those people told their myths and their legends about.
And so
new art, new audio, and a new campaign, allowing you to ultimately create your own adventures in that as well.
And then I'm assuming you have other ideas for other folklore that you want to bring in?
Oh, of course. And, again, you guys know the MMO space, so I'm always proud to, state that I'm an alum of CCP. I lived in Iceland for a year working on EVE Online and things, and the Icelandic sagas, Norse mythology, right? Those things feel like they fit very well alongside the Slavic mythology, right? But then you start thinking differently about, well, then there's Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, right? There's a lot of things that are very different. And so you can expect that, we're going to get this thing started in Slavic mythology and start branching out from there, and take a lot of cues from the community of what's the right way to go. Like, again, a way to think about it, do Egyptian mythology legends and tales and creatures, do they belong in the same space as the Slavic stuff, or are these different universes? I don't know if you are Fables, Bill Willingham's Vertigo work with DC Comics, but he did a really neat way of mashing up all fairy tale characters into one universe in a way that actually worked. And when suddenly Aladdin and the Arabian Nights sort of stuff peaked in, it was exotic and yet consistent. That would be the way we'd like to handle it. But okay, that's a discussion to have with the community. What makes sense, right? What makes sense to go here? What do they want to be creating, and what do they want to play? That is kind of how we're thinking about it.
And I'm sure some of that stuff will be kind of worked out in the beta as well. That's kind of what the beta is going to be for, I would assume.
You got it. I mean, that's why you do them, right? Is to get good community feedback, to listen and to make changes and adjustments and things. And we've done, a lot of what we are trying to do with the platform now is anchored around the idea that we want everybody to be able to create these adventures, and then we want everybody to be able to play every adventure that everybody creates. And that has led to some interesting game design decisions that are a little different from what we did with Tunnels and Trolls and Cthulhu Chronicles. And so, as an example of that, and I'm trying to think of how to put this. When you create a universe, let's assume you've created your own universe here in the Meta Arcade platform. We are starting with a sense of there are 3 attributes that each character has. So for Tunnels and Trolls, for Cthulhu Chronicles, and for Old Roads right now, pretty straightforward: strength, dexterity, intelligence. What's the way that you as a character want to engage with problems and conflict? Right? Are you a warrior, a rogue, or a
right?
Okay. But when you're creating your own universe, you can call those 3 attributes anything you want. I mean, if you want to make a fuzzy cat adventure, right? It might be cuteness, claws, and purring. I don't know, right? There's no reason why you can't. And the way we're anchoring attributes in the skill check and combat system right now is around the idea of kind of a rock, paper, scissors, where each attribute is better than one and worse to another, and bringing that sort of stuff into combat so that you can have this persistent kind of eternal champion who wanders the universe and can go into any of these universes and engage in the combat there. We've got mechanics on how we're going to avoid obvious anachronisms, where you won't get a suit of chainmail in Buffalo Castle and Tunnels and Trolls and then walk down the street in Arkham wearing it in Cthulhu Chronicles.
Right.
We've got ideas on that. But part of what we realized is, if you're going to build a platform where everyone can create content, including their own universes, and you ultimately want everyone to be able to play everything everybody creates, you kind of need to have a different perspective on what it means to make a persistent character, and what progression means, what inventory means, what stats mean, right? And so this is a big thing that is exciting for us as we go off on this, of that idea of, all right, you've got a character and you're always progressing and you're always able to tailor yourself in a loadout style for the adventure that you're about to go into, and you're able to do it in a way that always lets you play whatever adventure anybody wrote. Because if you made a universe and a set of adventures and people needed to create new characters to play them, I worry that becomes a barrier, right? That I have a character, I'm attached to that character, I want to take that character into all this content. We didn't want to be a platform where everybody had to have dozens of characters to play in dozens of universes. And so we've taken that kind of approach in the game design.
So when does the beta start, and how was one sign up for said beta?
So we are starting in February. I don't have a date to announce just yet. We are doing our last bits of polish and testing and things like that. So we are on track for February, and for people who are interested in paying close attention, you can always just follow Meta Arcade on Facebook and on Twitter. We also have a Discord where we are talking with community members every Friday in our fireside chats, as well as, just we're always there, right? So when people have individual questions and things like that, we may answer them asynchronously, but we are there and we answer them. And so, the way to stay in touch with us is that as well. And the biggest thing is to register for the closed beta, and that is again on metaarcade.com, where you can get into the newsletter and get registered for the closed beta. I forgot to mention the Discord address there. It's just a bit.ly/metaarcade_Discord. Pretty self-explanatory if you know your way around Discord.
Yeah, and I will put links to all of this down in the show notes for this episode, but we look forward to see what's coming up, and of course looking forward to talking with you at Gen Con.
Oh, not a problem at all. I look forward to it. I love Gen Con, and it'll just be a lot of fun to show show you where we are at that point. But rest assured, we're going to be keeping you posted along the way as well.
All right. I appreciate that. Well, thanks so much, David, for taking some time out today. Talk about the Meta Arcade platform and your beta you got coming up.
Very cool. Thank you so much for having us.